I'm Judge Ravi Sandil, Judge of the 127th Civil District Court in Harris County, Texas. Every American enjoys certain basic rights. One of these rights, acknowledged in the 6th and 7th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution, and also included in the Texas Constitution, describes the right to an impartial jury in both criminal and civil cases. Being on a jury is a serious responsibility. While the judge determines the appropriate laws that should be applied to the case, it is the jury that determines the outcome of the matter. In order to protect the right of an impartial jury, we want to discuss something that gets in the way: unconscious bias.
Hello, I'm Kim Ogg, Harris County District Attorney. When assessing any legal case in its presentation, you'll be asked to consider the bias of witnesses and parties. Equally important to fairness in our courtrooms is an understanding of our own biases. Bias is defined as prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared to another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. Bias can be conscious or unconscious, societal or personal, but any bias can affect our judgment. And because it's your judgment that our justice system calls for, whether in fulfilling your duties as a juror or grand juror, we want you to consider a few things.
Represented a young man on an aggravated robbery case once, and the juror raised her hand and she said, "Mr. Moncrief, may we approach the bench?" Well, we approached the bench for the judge, and she said, "I cannot be fair to your client because he's Hispanic." And I was raised to believe that Hispanics and blacks commit crimes and robberies, so I could not be fair. But what stuck with me was when she was about to sit down, she said, "I'm sorry." And I told her, "No, don't be sorry. I am so glad you said that, because if you had not said that, you may be sitting on the jury making a decision upon someone's life based upon your bias rather than the facts themselves." Unconscious bias is this, and I'll show you an example. There was this doctor, Northeast. She was getting on the airplane with her son. He's 5 years old. They get on the plane, they're the only black people on the plane. But way in the back of the plane, there was a black man. And the little boy turned to his mom and said, "Mom, that's my dad back there." She said, "No, that's not your dad. That's just another black man on the plane." And the little boy turned to his mom and said, "I hope he's not here to rob anybody." The mother was aghast, as you can imagine. She said, "Why did you say that?" He said, "I don't know."
Like the example cited by Mr. Moncrief, the presence of biases is all around us. And although we see other people's biases, it's easy to forget about our own. This means we've got to take precautions to recognize that while bias exists, it cannot be allowed to color a candid evaluation of evidence or witnesses in the cases you will hear. Because our court system contemplates equal treatment of all parties, bias can be a subtle but significant problem in the courtroom and even the jury room. It can cause an unjust result. Therefore, when making a determination about the credibility of a witness or of evidence, ask yourself what you might naturally assume about the person or situation before any testimony has been given or evidence presented. This is the time to recognize that assumptions are symptoms of unconscious bias. How do you know? They exist before you've even been presented with a fact or a statement. Assumptions are the unconscious bias we must guard against, and they have to be checked at the door of our justice system.
Initially, I'm from an old school. Guys with tattoos were not impressive to us. So I assumed that this guy with this tattoo was not very smart and would not be a good juror for my particular case. Well, I was wrong. Come to find out, this guy had won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. Highly intelligent. And the tattoos represented a story of his family. I didn't know that. I had already reached a conclusion about who he was before I knew anything about him. That's what you have to be aware of. If you have a bias, remember, tell the judge, tell the lawyers. It's important that you tell them. And the reason it's so important is because they're not there to judge you or your bias. All we want to do is bring it to surface, because if we bring it to surface, then we can know whether you would fit in this particular case. Some people have biases. I've had on my jurors who've been perfect jurors. Some people could not get over the bias, and they would not be a good juror in this particular case.
Tips for avoiding unconscious bias. Be aware it exists. Admit it has no place in a justice system that relies upon the judgment of unbiased jurors. Consider assumptions that come to mind before facts are even presented. Devote your mind to an independent evaluation of a case by eliminating any pre-existing opinions about testimony or evidence you haven't yet seen or heard. Stay on guard for the creep of unconscious or conscious bias when making a decision.
We are all affected by unconscious bias on a daily basis. The more aware we are of it, the better. Don't hesitate to question yourself about unconscious bias. Simply having good intentions is not enough. Please practice the steps we've discussed to help us deliver on our promise of a fair trial for all.
I'm Harris County District Clerk Marilyn Burgess, and on behalf of the county, I'd like to thank you for participating in an important piece of our democracy. Thank you for your service today.